Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Today it is our guy Ben Standig, of course, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. He is down in South Florida. Ben, how are you, sir?
Craig, doing well. I'm not going to, we've all had all that heat up in the D.C. area for several weeks, but it's different down here. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, South Florida is nasty. So I saw at the end of practice they moved inside today. Was that because a storm came in, or did it just get that damn hot that they were like, this is stupid, let's go to the air conditioning?
I don't know. There was not a storm. They weren't even inside very long. Both teams did like a 2-minute drill. Miami went first, and it was, went a few plays. Washington, its first play, Jayden Daniels goes to throw to Terry McLaurin on an out pattern, but Terry falls. Kendall Fuller is guarding him, and he intercepts it, and that was it. Like they didn't be like, all right, it's only one play, let's just keep going. So they weren't inside long. I don't know why. I was happy for those 10 minutes for the air conditioning, but it was kind of odd.
Okay, maybe they thought a storm was coming or something. I don't know. Whatever. That's that. Outside of wow, it's hot out here. The big story online today is, of course, the discourse about Jahan Dotson and wide receiver 2. We'll get there. But as you walk away from practice, what's the thing that you keep thinking about going back to, whether it's a part of practice, something you saw? What's your biggest takeaway from the Commanders' practice today with the Dolphins?
So I just filed a story a little bit ago that'll be up on The Athletic, and I reviewed what I'd written about, kind of everything. I had to check with one of the other writers, hey, just to be sure, I feel like this is overly positive. Was there anything wrong today? And nobody could really come up with anything. I mean, not that I'm looking for the wrong, but usually there's something happening, but there just really wasn't. So it did feel like they were, on their game, relatively speaking. And I'm not saying they dominated practice, but, there weren't as glaring issues as there were last week, particularly with the secondary. I thought Mike Sainsristil had some good moments. The other guys, whether it was Forbes or Jeremy Chin, also had some moments. So, I think that was pretty good. And I think on the offensive side, the offense was on the far field from where we were, so it was a little tough to see, I'll be honest. But Jayden Daniels and the offense in the red zone, that's where they started practice. And the Miami writers couldn't get over how much Washington was just throttling them in the red zone, that it was unofficial, 5 touchdowns in not that many plays. And just everything was working with Jayden Daniels and the passing game. And I go back to Cliff Kingsbury's MO has been really good starts for whatever teams he's coaching. Things get a little hairier after that, but, I don't want to go too overboard, but it does seem like the offense is showing some pretty decent efficiency here. Even last week, right? The first possession, they go down the field and score. So I think that was some good aspects there. And again, Jayden Daniels continues to impress whoever's watching him.
Yeah, definitely. On the defensive side, that's great to hear, especially if you think back to the last time these two teams shared a field and how poor the secondary was last year with Miami and this offense and all the speed and the matchups and the whole deal. I saw Sainsristil's name pop up. I don't know if there were turnovers created today. What was so impressive about what they were able to do against this high-powered, quick strike Miami offense?
Yeah, I guess it just felt like they were, they just weren't getting beat and giving up big plays too much. I mean, there were, last week against Garrett Wilson with the Jets, just seemed like he had his way with them all over the place. Here, they were more effective. Sainsristil on back-to-back plays in a red zone drill. He went one-on-one against Tyreek Hill, helped knock the ball away. And then the next play, Miami ran a reverse, and he held firm on his side and was able to, make the play, as it were. He's just such a smart player, and that's continued to show all summer. Like I said, I'm not acting like Miami completed no passes, but they weren't, there just weren't as many breakdowns. Now, I say that Tyreek Hill zoomed past St. Juste on one play, and if not for a 2 overthrow, has, an 80-yard touchdown or something. So, but that's how it goes, right? You've got to make the other team make a play, and that one they didn't. So, and then also I think, to go back to the defense, obviously, again, no tackling, but, Dorrance Armstrong got back there, would have been a sack if, if that was allowed. And, the defensive front has, generally been a strength so far this summer. So, I just felt like it was a pretty good showing overall. Again, watching it from our vantage point, no replays, you can't see everything. You might have missed something, but it just didn't seem nearly as leaky as it was last week.
Ben Standig, Commanders beat reporter with us from Miami, where the Commanders practiced against the Dolphins today. We'll play them in a preseason game this weekend. Saturday, 7 o'clock is the kickoff time. Ben, we talk about this wide receiver 2 thing, and some people are parsing as well, Dotson might start, but it might be in the slot. And I'm kind of like, we all know what we mean here. Is Jahan going to be out there on 2 wide receiver sets? For Sainsristil, is there a chance that he winds up being cornerback 2, if you will, or maybe even if you want to put it this way, cornerback 1, that if they're on the rare occasions that they are in some kind of base defense where there are just 2 corners on the field, that he is playing some on the outside this season?
Yeah, and it could be they have 2 corners with 3 safeties, right? So, you could still have nickel in that way. I don't think it's inconceivable. I don't. I mean, I think that, look, a year ago, and collectively we're all kind of saying, hey, Forbes is looking pretty good in camp. Things obviously fell apart. The difference here is just that, part of what makes Sainsristil work is his smarts on the field and his competitiveness. And I think that really holds up. To me, he almost feels like the safest corner they have right now. So it won't, I could see it happening. He's just obviously not the biggest guy, and that's potential liability on the outside, but and maybe they don't want to overdo it, right? Hey, he's a rookie, let's let him learn this slot and go from there. But considering the other corners, it's just not, you can't feel too confident about that group right now. I don't think it's inconceivable that Sainsristil is on the outside at some points.
Yeah, he took some reps there the other day in practice, and I was like, wait a second, what are you doing out there? And I also know that they're high on Noah Igbenogany. And so if that's the case, a guy who can play inside, outside, I really do wonder if Sainsristil winds up playing outside some, and whether it's opposite Forbes, opposite St. Juice. I think those 2 are probably ahead of Michael Davis. It's kind of one of those things, Ben, that you put a pin in this time of year, and whether it comes up immediately at the start of the year and we're sitting there opening day against Tampa being like, wow, I can't believe he's one of the 2 guys out there, or injuries crop up, whatever, poor play, great play by Sainsristil, that week 4 or 5, it just wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden he doesn't leave the field, because that's ultimately what it's about, right? It's just, let's get our best guys on the field, and as you said, he seems like one of their best guys.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that is, across the board, with the 53, in a year in which this is a recalibration, to use Dan Quinn's term, this is about acquiring the best talent and figuring out the rest. I think this is more about the notion of the position flex term that we got annoyed with over the last few years. But I think one of the things that's different is it felt like that group was leaning too much into guys who they thought were versatile versus taking guys who were the most talented and then figuring out what they can do. So, I think what you're saying is definitely conceivable, that to a degree it is about getting your best guys out there. Kendall Fuller today, he mentioned on zone that play Jayden Daniels made, the check play last week and throws the ball 40 yards. And he said, you got to give that guy a lot of credit. That shows a lot of confidence as a rookie. And sometimes you just have to play football. Don't worry about X's and O's. You just have to go play. And so to that extent, I kind of think there's something to be said for, if you're rebuilding a roster, don't worry as much about, hey, we need such and such a player in this one specific situation. Who are our best players, and figure out ways to use them. And I feel like that's kind of where they're headed.
So that then brings us to the actual Dotson discussion. What did you see from Jahan today after Dan Quinn says in the pre-practice press conference, wide receiver 2 were in the middle of that competition?
Yeah, well, I think that the quote in and of itself, I think, is, the biggest thing, because this is now like the 3rd or 4th time over the last few days in which something has come up, or, starting with the fact that Dotson played the most snaps in the preseason opener among the receivers, and then Quinn was asked about it a couple days later, and he didn't give the answer like, oh, we love Jahan, this, that, and the other. We're just trying different things out. He was just like, yeah, we're trying guys out. We'll see. And then today he was asked flat out by somebody, what's up with your wide receiver 2 competition? And he's like, yeah, we're in the middle of it right now. We'll see. And then he starts listing off names. He starts with Zacchaeus, gets to Jahan later. Clearly they are not loving something that's going on right now. I mean, Jahan still runs very crisp routes, so I don't think it's that. He has seemed off a bit. Just like, again, I don't want to get in like hoops, what's going on in somebody's head, but I don't know, he just seemed off. And, from what I saw today, I saw him make a couple of catches, but I think it goes beyond sort of that aspect, right? We've all talked about the struggles with Jamin Davis and Emmanuel Forbes. Davis learning a position, Forbes trying to improve. And every time the coaches are asked about those guys, they say, hey, look, Jamin is making this switch with no complaints. He's really working hard. We're really impressed that he's doing that. Forbes, kind of the same thing. We're trying to help the young man out. He put on some weight. That shows a lot, et cetera. Jahan, we're not kind of getting that. It's just more of, hey, yeah, there's a competition. We'll see. So it does feel like there's something going on that they're just not loving. And, look, a lot of this for this team this year beyond the roster is resetting the culture. And, that to me is as much as anything. They are truly living and breathing by the notion of competition. It's something that Quinn has instilled in this group all the way back into the spring, and that's continued. So, yeah, look, and I think I don't think this is why he's doing it, but it definitely sends a message to the rest of the team. If a guy who was picked in the first round just a couple of years ago is not the obvious starter, especially when it's not like there's some deep group behind them, it's showing you guys that you got to bring it every day in practice, because nobody is a sacred cow here.
So let me ask the most open-ended version of this question. What are the range of outcomes then for Jahan Dotson with the Commanders over the next couple of weeks?
Well, look, obviously he could be, he could end up starting, whether in 2 or 3 receiver sets. Look, I think Zacchaeus has had a very good camp, and both Dan Quinn to the group and Cliff Kingsbury to me today said as much. But look, and he's had some success in the NFL, but he's never been a top guy, 5'8", speed guy. Like, fine, but that's not a typical guy. Number 2, Diami's had a really good year. We know, he hasn't done a ton in his first 3 years, but he's got that downfield speed, and Quinn has cited his energy a lot as something he likes. It's conceivable that Jahan is, kind of behind all those guys, including Terry. Now, if it gets to that point is when I think things start getting interesting. And I talked about this in my podcast the other day that, when you look at the 32 snaps and then the comments that have been made and all that, like, I don't know. It seems like that, this is not reporting. I'm just talking out loud. I mean, it seems conceivable that if they reach a certain point where he is, further down the depth chart, where they may start saying it makes sense to trade him, right? Because he's not a special teams guy unless he's returning kicks. And if they're not into him for some reason, which again, I'm not stating it that they're out on him, but the signs aren't great right now, that, maybe it makes sense to move on now, he still has 2 years left on his contract. Some team might value that on the rookie deal, and you can get a little bit more for him than if you wait a year. So, and I think next year, 2025, is when Adam Peters starts being more aggressive, assuming Jayden Daniels looks the part this year, and having an extra pick could help. So, yeah, I think the range of outcomes is that far. He could still start, and maybe he reaches a point where trading him makes sense. It's just been a curious few days that it's gone this route. And like I said, I feel like when listening to these guys, Dan Quinn in particular, sure, we all would love if they were a little more, open with a few things. But in general, I don't sense that they're BSing us either. And taking their answers for what it is, they have not, again, whenever Jahan comes up, they're not saying, oh, no, don't worry about him. He's great. He's in the lineup. It's all good. We're just trying different things. They're not saying that. And again, flat out today, we're in the middle of the competition, and then he cites off other people before he gets to Jahan. So I think the with the range of outcomes is pretty significant.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I've actually been saying for a couple of days, like, again, not reporting, just like connecting dots, going, I feel like he is more valuable to them at this point, if this is how they feel, as a trade chip potentially than a actual football player. Of course, then people are screaming about, oh, then trade him for Ayuk. And I'm like, you realize that if he doesn't fit Adam Peters' profile, San Francisco's not going to want him, right? So there's that. But I'm sure someone out there certainly would. The Commanders, for as bad as Ron and the Marty Party were, they weren't the only team that thought Jahan Dotson was a first-round pick. What do we expect this weekend in terms of playing time? Not for Dotson. Dan Quinn said that he's going to play a lot, as there are a lot of these other guys. But starting O-line, Jayden Daniels, and some of the big-name starters on defense. As I know that Dan and Mike McDaniel kind of compared notes on this so that they were both on the same page going into both the practice and the game.
Yeah, I think they were conservative last week, sitting a bunch of guys. Dan Quinn kind of made it sound like, John Allen, Bobby Wagner, those kinds of guys may be out there a little bit more than they were. Those guys weren't out there at all, but they might be out there, but don't expect to see them long. They're factoring in the reps today combined with the snaps on Saturday. So hopefully, from their perspective, they feel like they got enough out of those guys today to do, to not have to do much more than, put the group out there and give them a series or two or something. And I would expect that to be the case with, on the other side with Terry and Sam Cosmi, et cetera. And in terms of Jayden, I don't get the sense he's going to play much more than one series. I would think so. But, in other years, I might think, okay, he's going to go the first half and then they'll turn it over. But I don't know. I'm not getting, based on what Quinn was saying today and my just general sense, I don't really think he's going to play a ton. Again, they've liked what they're seeing from him. He's, playing. And here's the thing also I will just say in terms of, like, people might think, hey, joint practices, come on. What's that? I mean, that's pretty vanilla, even more than a preseason game maybe. I think with Miami, though, is they were running their stuff. Like, they were running cover zero and blitzing from different angles. And, like, Jayden really, had to figure this out and study it. It wasn't just sort of generic across the board. And I know Kingsbury was a big fan of that because he doesn't want to wait until the season starts for him to see it. So the fact that happened could be even more incentive for the staff to be like, you know what, he saw enough. We're good. Of course, there is the other variable of Marcus Mariota dealing with what Quinn said was like a minor groin injury. They're going to keep him out this week. So not that that's a big deal or a factor, but, you're already dealing with potentially the backup quarterback missing a little time. We know Sam Hartman's hurt too. So, I think getting Jayden in and out is probably the course of action.
Yeah, for sure. And then Driscoll, and then it's the Trace McSorley Show, what dreams are made of. Last couple of minutes here with Ben Standig on the Hoffman Show. Of course, Ben, you can read his work in The Athletic. You can listen to the Standig Room Only podcast as well. And Ben, one thing that you noted from practice today that you were keeping your eye on that actually caught my eye in Albert Breer's notebook that he does. Breer's doing his training camp tour. He was in Ashburn on Tuesday. Breer is not out there every day, obviously, but he does have great relationships. And so when he notes something small that is clearly from talking to someone and not from just watching with his own eyes, I'm like, perhaps that's worth sticking a pin in. And you said you were watching Dominique Hampton take a lot more snaps at linebacker, which is what Breer said, that there's a transition going. And at first I was like, I don't know. He's been playing kind of dime linebacker the entire camp, and I've seen him continue to work at safety as well. But it seems like that the shift or the ratio of work is shifting a lot more in the linebacker direction. What have you been able to dig up reporting-wise, and what are you seeing on Dominique Hampton and maybe even anybody else who's spending a little more time where we don't expect them to?
Yeah, so I sort of followed up with what Breer said because he made it sound like Hampton was transitioning to linebacker, whereas, and I think you would probably agree, like, well, Jeremy Chin will play in the box at times when they go to a dime or
right,
whatever.
Exactly.
And so he's essentially being a linebacker, but not really. So is that what we're talking about here? And, what I got was, it's still a guy in Hampton who's going to do, multiple safety positions and play in the box a bit. He's a big guy, 220. I think he's like 6'2", 6'3". So he can do it. But I do think there is something to them wanting to see him at linebacker. If you recall last year, Dallas had they lost Leighton Vander Esch pretty early, and then they had another linebacker injury. So they really had to dig into going with a lot of safeties and defensive backs, but they felt a little more comfortable doing it because they had some guys that they had already seen play some of this, get some reps in the camp doing this. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. So Hampton was out there in the unit drills before practice started, or, before the team practice started, working with the linebacker. So I don't think he's not making a position switch, but at the same time, I think they're prepping to have, a guy like that be able to be available. And, we'll see ultimately what they do with their 53-player roster. The ones I've been putting together, I've only had them keeping 4 linebackers, and that was before the Jordan McGee injury. We don't, he's out this week. We'll see how bad that is ultimately, this knee injury. But, if you're keeping 4, right, then you may need to have somebody else be able to fill in. So I think this is covering their bases, experimenting, which they're doing across the board. But yeah, he's not a linebacker, but they are willing to see him get more reps at that spot, either just in case or, hey, you never know.
Good reporting. That's why we have Ben on. That's why The Athletic employs him and pays him money, because he's good at the job. He knows what to look for. Bang, bang, boom. Ben Standig, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. Read his work there. And don't miss the Standig Room podcast. Of course, frequent guest, not only with us, but with Sheehan and everybody else on our Odyssey stations. Ben, always appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your time in Miami, as much of it as you possibly can in air conditioning.
Yeah, air conditioning is for the win. That's for sure. Thanks, man.
You got it. That's Ben Standig, everybody, with us on The Hoffman Show.
This is The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.